So, Lunga, thank you very much for taking time to sharing your insights into leadership. But before we go into leadership, can you tell us a little bit more about your own background? Where did you grow up?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me. Well, firstly, I was born, bred and buttered in the Eastern Cape. I was born in a small town of Ladyfrere, which sits approximately 35 kilometers east of Queenstown. And that's where I would have spent my formative years. I would have thereafter spent some time living in Cape Town with my aunt. This was during the early 90s. It was a different time. There was a political transition on the way. And I think my parents had a view that there was far better racial integration and better opportunities for me from a schooling perspective that side. And thereafter I would have moved back with my mom, who by that stage started working in East London. And so I would have spent some time in East London where I would have started my schooling. Thereafter I also did a bit of schooling in Queenstown. And from there I came back to East London to finish off school. I did matric and so on in East London. Thereafter I went off to the University of KwaZulu-Natal,
Right.
which is where my education at a tertiary level would have started. But before that, I spent a year at the Sharks Academy, where I played rugby, and at that stage, of course, one had aspirations of becoming a professional rugby player, and hopefully at some point also donning the green and gold.
Right.
But thereafter I would have spent a year there. Then I went to University of KwaZulu-Natal, Howard College campus, where I did my studies, my LLB, did my LLM thereafter.
So before we go into your career, what was your dream career when you grew up?
I'd always wanted to be involved in law. I'd always wanted to be a lawyer growing up. The difference, I think there would have been an interruption of that thinking during the period where I said I had aspirations of being a professional rugby player. And so that would have been interrupted. But fortunately about my aspirations, that they weren't mutually exclusive. One held a view that you could, pursue a rugby career, and thereafter, once you're done, one could thereafter go and go practice law and so on. But because of the persuasion of my parents, I would have only spent a year trying to pursue that, and thereafter did the safer thing, which is going off to university and getting a degree and so on.
And tell us, who inspired you in those early days?
I think, you have to, it's a broad spectrum of people, who would have inspired me to pursue the particular profession that I would have. But I think the first thing is that you're always influenced by your socio-economic environment, where you grow up, right? So, in my formative years, my mother was quite involved when I was growing up in the trade union movement in East London, and she would have been an activist there. So that would have influenced my thinking. I would have also been fortunate in that my father was an attorney, and that would have also influenced my thinking into going into law, no doubt. And then, of course, you would have also had a look. I've always had a great interest in history. So I've read a lot of history books and so on, particularly about the political struggle. And one would have learned that, there were freedom fighters who were also lawyers and so on and so forth. So you look at all of those things and you combine them. What they give you is an impression that the law is really something that one can pursue in order to achieve some sort of egalitarian objectives. And so all of those influencing factors, all of those factors that I've pointed out, environment, and also when you were born, right? I'm born in 87, right? And I would have been a very young person during the transition. And so you look at all of those factors, when you're born, where you grow up, your parents, no doubt, and some of your interests of your own that you develop. And you also think of outcomes. What are the outcomes? What would one want to achieve and use with this law? And so all of those factors would have been what influenced me and the career path that I would have chosen.
So tell us, where did you start your career?
So I did my pupillage, that is training to become an advocate in Grahamstown, at the Grahamstown Bar. I would have spent 2.5 years in Grahamstown, where I would have spent a year training and then spent about almost 2 years practicing. And thereafter, I have got an opportunity to come up to Johannesburg, rather unexpected, but it was an opportunity nevertheless. And that's the thing with opportunities; they come, when you least expect them, and you have to move, you have to take action. And so I would have done that. So I would have come up to Johannesburg thereafter. That takes me to about mid-2015. Where I got an opportunity to be in-house counsel at the Legal Resources Centre, their constitutional litigation unit, and so would have spent some years. That's what would have drawn me to Johannesburg, and I spent about 2.5 years there, and thereafter came back into private practice, as it were, and that's been my career journey to date.
Can you give us a couple of highlights? I mean, you've recently been chosen as one of the top 100 young Mandelas. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you were selected, and also a bit of information about the highlights of your career?
I've really been privileged that in a relatively short space of time, I've had the opportunity to be involved in really numerous, really fantastic and groundbreaking cases. And the fortunate thing about what I do and my personal view on things is that I enjoy it to such an extent that any matter that I'm involved in where one is able to make an impact is always a highlight. I always relish the next challenge, the next matter that one can be involved in. But particularly when you look at matters where you represent people really from disadvantaged communities, and matters whereby you are able to utilize the law in a really positive way to achieve really positive outcomes. So, whenever one gets to see, and it's rare from time to time, right, as a professional, because you do the case that you're involved in and you move on. But from time to time, you're privileged enough as a lawyer to be able to see in a tangible way the impact that you've been able to have and to create in a person's life. So I mean, those are always the type of matters that always highlights where you've been able to really have a positive impact. And I've been fortunate that that's the case in almost all the matters that I've been that I'm involved in. So it's a real positive.
Now, Lunga, you specialize in social justice. Is that right?
That's that's an area, of course, that I have an interest in. In other words, using the law in order to achieve social justice, to live in a socially just society. So that's the objective that I seek to achieve from utilizing the law. I have a different view on so-called high-profile matters.
Right.
What is high-profile and what is not, and so on and so forth. My view is that every single matter that I do and that I'm involved in is one such important and so-called high-profile matter, because to the people to whom that you're representing and to whom that you're providing a service, that particular matter is of utmost importance. So it's always important for one to have that type of mentality, irrespective of the type of matter that they get involved in, to always ensure that you put your best foot forward. So I mean, there's been a wide variety of matters that one would have had the privilege of being involved in. Also,
Lunga, tell us, looking back over your career so far, would you say there was a turning point where you could have taken a different turn and things could have turned out differently?
I think that coming to Johannesburg personally would have been a turning point in my career. Deciding that one is going to pursue a career in this particular part of the world, I think, is without a doubt. And the reason for that is quite simple. It's that, when you in this part of the world, you have access to a variety of work, firstly, but secondly, you also have access to a different variety of specialist courts, and that's what being in Johannesburg would have afforded me personally. So there's been a tremendous amount of personal growth, having come here. So definitely that, in my view, would have been a turning point in my career.
And tell us, Lunga, what is driving you today?
Create change. I think the really important thing for me about and what drives me as a professional is to try to find out how it can be, how you can achieve a situation in the country whereby everyone has the access to justice, in particular access to legal representation. That's my real fascination at the moment. But you have to look at these things in a really systemic way. So currently in the country, we have the ironic situation whereby there is a progressive constitution, relatively progressive laws, but the difficulty is that the average person, the average citizen, simply cannot afford legal representation. That's the irony. Now, if you cannot afford legal representation, it becomes quite difficult for you to be able to enforce your rights, right? So you have rights, but they only have meaning once you begin to enforce them. If you don't enforce them, well, it becomes very difficult to speak of a rights discourse. And so the difficulty that we have in the country, in my own personal view, is that the legal profession is really engineered in such a way that it is only corporations, I'm talking about big corporations, it is state-owned enterprises, it is the state and wealthy individuals who can actually afford legal services. You and I'm afraid, Nick, are, really, really struggle when it comes to that. It's even worse when you look at the poorest of the poor. So you have to look at this right from the bottom, the poorest of the poor. Fortunately, when it comes to that particular segment, you have the legal aid, right? Legal aid board. The thresholds, last I checked, were very, very low. You're looking at about a household income of about 6,000 per household. That's how you qualify. You can see that's quite low. And what happens if you fall outside of that? How do you access legal services? Right? It doesn't mean that just because you fall outside of that threshold, right, that you're a person who can actually afford legal services. So there's a massive gap. There's a massive gap that we have between that particular segment, so that particular segment of the population, and the segment that I've highlighted to you, which are basically the wealthy corporations, government, and so on. So that's what really drives me today, to try to figure out how this problem can be resolved.
So Lunga, let's talk about the future of leadership. And I know it's a big question, but what does the future of leadership mean to you?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to understand, in my view, about leadership is that you don't have to be an elected representative in order to be a leader. you can be a leader in whatever that you do. All right. You could, for instance, decide that I'm a writer, and that's what I do. I write. I put up blogs, etc., etc. I write novels, or whatever the case may be. Right. You can be a leader without having a constituency that's elected you and said, "Oh, you know what I mean? We're going to vote and so for so and so." So I think that's the first idea that we need to think about and to understand that you do not have to be a leader, right, by means of being voted by a particular constituency. I think that leadership is specifically about having a particular vision about where you want to move or where you want to move a particular segment in society, or even society as a whole, the direction in which you want to move them. I think that you can show your leadership with your innovation, right? Specifically in the particular sector that you are in order to come up with ways of really resolving societal problems. So I think that the future of leadership. So that's the first thing. You don't have to be elected. The second thing, I think, the future of leadership really lies in innovation, and from my perspective, when you're talking about innovation, I'm specifically talking about how we can utilize modern technology, the internet, and so on, in order to find solutions to societal problems. And I think that's where really we are going to begin to find, I think, a new wave of leadership that I don't think would probably fit the so-called traditional definition of what leadership's going to be. And I think the third part of this is that leadership is going to be youthful. I think that the irony of our continent is that we live in a we live in a youthful continent. But when you look at positions of leadership, whether you're talking in government, whether you're talking public sector, or you're talking about the private sector, in our continent we have old people drafting policies for young people. And that's the irony that we find ourselves in, is that young people are not necessarily involved in that process. And in my view, I think that the time has come for young people to actually usurp, not to ask for a place at the table, to usurp their role, their positions, their seats at the table, especially for the continent. I think it's going to be very important, because I think that young people have very different ideas about where the continent should go. I think that young people are really embracing technology. If you look at Kenya, just an example of how technology is really being embraced to really address societal problems. And I think that the more young people you have coming to the fore in respect of leadership, I think that the better. And of course, history is also littered with examples, right, of young people actually coming to the fore in respect of leadership and changing the course of their particular nations. So I mean, we're littered with examples of that, and I don't think that there's any reason why now shouldn't be the time, I think, for young people. So those are my three ideas of what leadership is going to look like in the future.
So tell us, Lunga, what have you learned from your own journey that you consider most important for building future leaders?
I think that future leaders should immerse themselves in the issues, in the struggles of their particular communities. Right. And look elsewhere for other people to resolve problems that occur within your country, your province, your village, your suburb, township, and so on and so forth. I think that it's important for one to realize and to understand that they are the answers that they're searching for. They are the solutions to what they're searching for. So I really think that it should start with you. Everything that you're faced with, all issues that I think you have to attend to, it should start with you. What is your input to the solution? Part of the problem? Are you part of the solution? And depending on where you find yourself, what it is that you're going to do in order to resolve them. I really think that what I've personally learned is that you have to be objectives orientated. That's my personal view. That's how I generally do things when I get into a particular type of situation, be it an opportunity or whatever the case may be. One of my primary concerns and questions is, what are my objectives? What do I seek to achieve from being there? And I think that once you start probing and asking yourself those type of questions, it's inevitable that you'll be able to find answers. So that's what I say. Have objectives. Look within. Ask yourself about where you want to go, and hopefully your answers will guide you in the right direction.
And Lunga, when you speak to young leaders, what do you tell them they should focus on for future-proofing their career?
You focus, you start now. Whatever it is that you're looking ahead into, right, into the future. I want to be this, I want to be that, or whatever the case may be, right? You start now with whatever it is that you want to do. You don't have to be, for instance, a lawyer, right? In order to start thinking about what are some of the challenges, right, that society faces in respect of the legal profession, right? How do people access this? Like I said to you, we started was a group of students, it was almost 9 to 10 years ago now, right? We started thinking about these issues, right? So you start now. You don't have to be a qualified, a technician or computer scientist to start thinking about how do I go about making the internet more accessible to people, not just in the country, but to the continent. Do you understand? Because I always say, start now. And as I always say, history is littered with examples of people who start early. It's always one of the best times, I think, the youthful period, to start thinking about these ideas. I think that you are afforded the advantage of being able to take more risks on your career, right? The second thing, be experimental. I always say you have to experiment. You have to try things out. Some things will succeed, others won't, right? But in all of that, you're learning. And then I think the other third and also critical point is also consider and look at the people, right, who occupy the particular areas of positions, professions, right, that you want to occupy someday. Not to mimic them, right, but to learn. It's part of I think that it's part of the learning process. You look at what they're doing and you learn. So I think from all of those lessons, you are able to build yourself up in whatever particular area that you want to go into.
So Lunga, let's talk about technology.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, in your mind, what are the key technologies that future leaders should study, learn about, and master?
Oh, for sure. I think that right now you simply cannot miss AI, artificial intelligence. I think that the potential that artificial intelligence has is immeasurable. And it's really also quite interesting to begin to understand that at this stage, artificial intelligence, at least in our country, is really at its infancy. I don't think that it's a mechanism that has been fully utilized. So I think that future leaders should study and begin to understand artificial intelligence. I think that it's going to have a massive impact on our lives in the next 25 to 30 years. And I think as time goes by, I think the more the products will begin to develop and to evolve. And I think that some of the issues that it will be able to to assist us in addressing are really incredible. I'm personally quite interested in utilizing artificial intelligence in my own profession and what I do. So what you find with a lot of products is that they're inward looking, so professional products, inward looking like. So they're all concerned with how I can be a better doctor, a better accountant, etc. But I'm looking from the outside. Look at how, for instance, you can utilize artificial intelligence, right, in order to give people access to legal services, access to justice. Imagine if you can just speak into a machine. You have a particular problem, Nick, and you say, look, I have such and such a legal problem to address. And before you even, hop off to go and consult with the attorney, you can speak into this machine and you can try to figure out some of the more fundamental issues that you can start pointing out. And you know what I mean? I think it's fantastic. So I think that artificial intelligence, there can be no doubt about it. I also think that from the perspective of currencies, I think that from cryptocurrency, I think that it's something that future leaders need to understand. I think it's something that we need to study because, look, it's taken off. That's the reality of it. Where it's going and whether it will last or not or whatever the case may be is another story altogether. But the important thing is that it's obviously completely shifted how we understand finance, how we understand money. So it's completely good. And the other important thing is also about regulation. So if you have this particular currency that's beginning to come to the fore, how are we going to begin to regulate that? I think that if you are a person in the medical sphere, I can't see how you can miss the stem cells debate. I really think that future leaders should also begin to look at that, stem cells, and how those can begin to affect us and to improve the health of people. Right? I know there are a lot of really fascinating experiments that are starting to happen in those particular spheres. I think that the future of finance, I also think, is really changing. I think that if you look at it globally, there's a sort of small movement away from traditional banking, right? People are using all sorts of other different mechanisms now for banking purposes. So I think that all of those type of issues, I think that we should really study and begin to understand. I think the last one, I think that future leaders must understand social media. They really need to understand, and its various manifestations. There are a variety of platforms, right? I think that future leaders should really begin to understand how these various platforms operate. They need to understand why people are even on these platforms and how they can use it to also shape the future. People are influenced by different things, but I think it's when one takes a step back and examines, I think social media in particular, where you'll begin to understand, I think, where society is going, people's particular interests, political views, people share information. I think we also, through understanding it, you can also curb the advent of things like fake news. People can be more discerning once they begin to understand, because I do also think that there are people who would want to utilize such a platform for nefarious ends. So I think when you look at all of those, and they're really influential platforms, you know what's happened recently with Facebook, what's happened, the US elections and the so-called influence of hackers and the spread of fake news and so on and so forth. So you need to understand that these particular mediums are incredibly powerful, and there are people who are also utilizing them to nefarious ends. So I think that once we begin to understand all of that, I think we'll be able to utilize them too for positive means.
And Lunga, can you tell us a little bit more about how you, in your own leadership, are using social media to communicate with your own audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have recently, so let me take a step back. My business partner and I, Thabo Titus, he's a computer scientist in Cape Town, are working on a platform. It's called Just Law Crowdfunding. And it's basically a crowdfunding platform for legal services. So if Nick has a problem, right, and he knows that there, has a particular problem that he wants to take up, that he wants to challenge, doesn't have the means, but he knows that this is a particularly important issue of public interest. Nick comes and says, all right, society, this is through the net, or through other campaigns as well. This is what I want to do. I need to raise X number of rands in order to be able to challenge this. You live in Johannesburg, so you probably have a water billing issue, right? And probably hundreds of thousands of people have that particular issue, who decide we want to take the municipality to task on this, right? But individually, I don't have the money.
Sure.
But let me then crowdsource the particular financial means in order to be able to challenge that issue. So you'd come onto our platform, create a campaign, right? And it would also be a conduit in which you would receive the finances. They'd be stored and they'd be redirected to the particular legal representatives or whatever the case may be that you'll be doing, that you'll be working with. So we decided that it's also important for there to be an educational component on the platform. And so we started a platform called Just Law. So this particular platform, right, it's a podcast. So what we do is that we publish weekly posts on a variety of legal issues. And what we do, we publish them, we record them, we publish, and people are able to interact on that. So it's very important that it has an educational element and component to it. And in our view, it's part of the steps that we are taking in order to bring about access to justice in the country. So fortunately, now anyone who has access to the internet can get onto our platform. It's there, Just Law on Twitter, Just Law on Facebook, and be able to access this information. The whole intention of it is for it to be interactive and informative. And so that is one of the ways in which I am currently utilizing social media in particular to be able to make contact with people and to also bring about this idea of accessibility. That's what it's all about, really.
Now, Lunga, tell us, as a future leader and one of the top 100 young Mandelas. Has there been mentors in your life? Somebody that mentored you, that gave you good advice, that you took to heart, that you can maybe share with us?
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, I think your first and probably most important mentors, if you're fortunate enough to be in that position, are your parents. For me, there cannot be any doubt about that. Those are my first and foremost mentors. They would have obviously had the opportunity to mentor you from your formative years, to be able to shape your thinking, to be able to influence you in a way that I think it's quite difficult, if not impossible, for other people to be able to do. So my parents. So that's first and foremost, and I think collectively what they have been able to teach me, I think it's really, there's no substitute for hard work. I used to play rugby, and we used to say there's no substitute for speed, right? In soccer they say the same thing. There's no substitute for speed, right? And but in any particular profession, I think that people will tell you as the golden principle: hard work. There just can be no substitute for that. So I think they really taught me that, which I think has been critically important lesson. The second thing, I think it's also seizing your opportunities. The window or the door of opportunity only opens every now and then. And you have to be able to be discerning enough to take advantage of those opportunities that you're afforded. So I think it's been a really critical one. And then I think the third one is creating your own opportunities. Those are things that my parents, amongst many others in the mentorship journey, whether they were teaching me consciously or unconsciously, it's another question altogether. But those are the lessons that I've been able to derive with them, and then they're critically important lessons, which have really, really armed me going forward. And I think professionally, my father's also been a massive influence in my career development. Has been really there for me when it comes to that, and so it's been really important to have a parent being involved in my life. And I think that this is just it's not rocket science. You look at any spheres, people have been able to really carve out really successful careers for themselves in any particular sphere. They've had parental support. So I think for me, that's been really most important. And I've also, had the benefit of also having the mentorship of colleagues within the profession. It's a vast, variety of them, who also either consciously or unconsciously, you can mentor someone from a distance. You can mentor me, Nick, just from working with you, right? It's all about those particular lessons that you're able to learn and how you utilize those to build on your own experiences. So for me, those have been really critically important mentors in my life, and who continue to be.
And tell us, Lunga, has there been somebody that you have mentored in your career?
And my career, it's relatively young and fledgling. I have had the opportunity of working with a really vast array of people, particularly students. So I sit on a particular board of a particular student organization, and I think I've had really numerous, incredibly fruitful discussions and interactions with them. without us ascribing titles to it, that I'm now mentoring so and so and so and so, and whatever the case may be. But I sincerely hope that through our interactions, they would have been in a position whereby they would feel that they have been mentored in a particular area or sphere of issues that they needed, I think, consideration on and advice and assistance on. And I really do think that I think I'm beginning to now, through the platforms that I've informed you about, also to find myself in a position, again, without subscribing titles to it, but to begin to, I think share ideas, experiences with people, and in the hope that through those ideas and experiences, they also learn and benefit, and somehow take the view that they've been mentored. Can remember, like I said to you previously, is that you can do a lot of things without subscribing titles, without having a particular constituency, like I'd said about leadership. And I think the same thing rings true when it comes to mentorship.
And Lunga, can you tell us, are there any role models of leadership that you would suggest future leaders should study and learn from?
Role models, I think people should. I think it's an incredibly interesting question, and especially when I'm going to take a step back and addressing that, especially when one considers the diversity and real complexity of our country. It's really difficult to say to an individual that, look, you have to be, you have to look at so and so. You know what I mean, in order for you to learn about leadership and so on and so forth. But what I would say is that I think that people need to look where they are in order to be able to create some sort of organic leadership. So I think that sometimes we look far and wide, you look abroad, and whatever the case may be, for examples of leadership, right? But sometimes those particular examples of leadership are in your local clinic, right? The people who are, the nurses who are putting in countless hours, right, in order to ensure that there's access to health. Okay, you're talking about the law enforcement officers who are working tirelessly in order to ensure that there's safety within our communities. You're talking about the community developers, right, who are working tirelessly within their communities to ensure that there's development, there's access to opportunities. I'm talking about teachers, who are working tirelessly, sometimes under very difficult circumstances, to ensure that children are educated and there's access to education. Talk about social workers who are equally working very hard within those particular communities to ensure that there's development. So these are just examples of what I say is that look around where you are. I don't think that in this country that we have a shortage of leadership. It might be that we don't ascribe the word leadership or leader to those particular people, but in my view, those are people who lead within society. So look within. It's really important for us to be engaged in the communities that we live in. Be engaged within society. And I think that you'll be able to find real sources of leadership and inspiration.
And tell us, Lunga, where can our listeners find you and how can they connect with you?
So the first thing is that one will be able to, I think, firstly, must follow Just Law. I have there are platforms. We have platforms on Facebook and also on Twitter, and we also have Just Law CF. That's our website, www.justlaw. We're almost close to launching Just Law. So it's www.justlawcf. That stands for crowdfunding.
.cf. CF.
.co.za. One will also be able to find me on Facebook. It's Lunga Siyo on both platforms, both on Facebook and also on Twitter. And I think that people can also, who want to connect with me, can also connect with me via email at lunga, Lunga, at siyo.co.za. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Now, Lunga, last but not least, is there one piece of advice that you would really like to convey to future leaders that they should consider in their own leadership?
I think that, sometimes when we talk about, when we think about leaders, we from time to time mistakenly think of great technical ability. But I think that in your own development, sure, develop yourself and your technical abilities incredibly well. But I really do think that you must also, in addition to that, develop an important quality and the ability to connect with people. People from all walks of life, different races and genders. I don't think that you can be an effective leader, notwithstanding technical brilliance, if you are simply out of touch. And out of touch, like I said, I don't think it only relates to your constituency, but just being out of touch in whether it's in your community or whether it's in your particular profession or even with your family. It's just simply inconceivable that you can lead in whatever way without having the ability to connect and to be in touch with people. I think empathy is a really big component of leadership that I think is underrated and quite often ill-considered. So I think that one must always remain in touch and really have the ability of empathy.
Well, Lunga, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom, and for distilling your leadership insights into such concise parts that you communicate so clearly. And thank you very much for helping us to build a better world.
Thank you very much, Nick. It's been an absolute privilege to be here with you, and I really appreciate the invitation.